East Timor, which was the scene of terrible violence and broke away from Indonesia and is now Timor-Leste, an independent country. And Australians sent troops there and suffered serious political strains with Indonesia as a result of all that. Australia recently has been so careful not to offend its big customer China that it's sent some signals that I might question a little bit. And let me give you two examples, one personal, one not. When I was in either Melbourne or Canberra, my visit coincided with that of Condoleezza Rice and the Queen. A little competition for me. But I don't often agree with the Bush administration, but Condoleezza Rice encountered in Australia a concern that we were pursuing containment of China. And she said, look, I'm a former Soviet expert. I know what containment is. We're not practicing containment of China. We're engaging and so forth and so on. And I got some of this same thing from a retired Australian government person who said we were practicing containment. And so I said, well, you know, I really agree with Condoleezza Rice. I don't think we are. But I got a tremendous concern. And by the way, when I was in Fremantle, Western Australia, you know, huge container ships, all kinds of houseboats being built, new construction going up. I mean, the headline in Australian newspaper was "Golden Shrimp on the Barbie." I mean, Australia is making out very well in the era of high commodity prices. And this, I think, is one of the motivations that's causing Australians to be very sensitive about not antagonizing China. The specific thing they did recently, I guess I said I was concerned, but I also can understand it. I mentioned the undesirability of organizing a kind of concert of democracies and rim democracies versus the mainland and all that. There is a three-power group of Japan, Australia, and the United States that have a kind of trilateral dialogue. And I think the Indians have wanted to get in on this too. Australia pulled out of it, or sent some signals it was going to pull out, even though the Chinese didn't seem to have any problems with a three-power discussion. You know, they'll do lots of combinations. You can talk with everybody. We have discussions with Chinese. But the Australians didn't want to offend the Chinese, so they pulled out of it. They've also indicated some reservations about Taiwan. If Taiwan provoked a conflict, they've suggested that they wouldn't necessarily come to the aid of Taiwan or the United States. I personally think this is a good thing. Well, I don't think it will. But the new Prime Minister, who is fluent in Mandarin and knows where the bread is buttered, I think is going to be quite careful about handling China. I don't, as I say, I think that the outgoing president of Taiwan, Chen Shui-bian, really did get out of hand on more than one occasion. So for the Australians to have said what they said, I thought was actually a rather good message to this bumptious fellow. Whoever becomes president, Frank Xie or Ma Ying-jeou of Taiwan, I think is going to be easier to handle than. So on the whole, this is a long-winded way of saying I think Australia is a rock. I think it's a stable ally. I think it's a force for good in the region. I think it's skeptical of all this, you know, regional integration movement, but it's playing its part. New Zealand it tags along, but isn't nearly as much of a player. Where are the immigrants coming from? Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that because when one of the ancestors of this regionalism movement came from former Prime Minister Mahathir of Malaysia, and he had huge chip on his shoulder about the West. He proposed something called the East Asian Economic Group, subsequently renamed Caucus, East Asian Economic Caucus, which was essentially the ASEAN +3, ASEAN plus China, Japan, South Korea. And Australia objected at the time, and he made it very clear they're a white country, and Western, and they're not Asian at all. So it's interesting what happened this last time, because in the first meeting of this East Asian Summit group, which I call Asia Major, by the way. You got it? Asia Minor, Asia Major. This is my name for this group is not East Asia Summit, because it's not East Asia. It's India, Australia, and New Zealand. But anyway, so this meeting gets convened, and Mahathir, who is still acerbic, and I say it openly, I think he's a racist, is gotten even more so. And he fulminated, he was out of power by this time, but he castigated his successor for going along with this grouping that included Australia. But I think on the political level, though, relations are much better since he left. But the migration issue, I wasn't aware of that. Yeah. Well, I've always said that job creation is a national security issue. That doesn't always compute in this town. Job creation is a national security issue because sudden and rapid movements of peoples can be upsetting and destabilizing, and certain communities take the immigrants. Yeah, well, it does, and Sweden has taken a huge number of Iraqis and so forth, and so I mean, the reason, and look at the immigration issue in this country with the Mexicans and so on. The reason I say it's a national security issue is that we ought to be paying a lot more attention to job creation in the home countries. After all, migration is an act of desperation, really. I mean, people would rather live at home. Filipinos are migrating in great numbers. Is that right? Yeah. Well, if the Asians are coming to buy iron ore, that would be one thing. But if they're competing for, yeah. I mean, it gets down to a national self-image. We see ourselves as an immigration country, and I think there's, as far as legal immigration is concerned, I think there's, we still absorb them pretty well, and we don't define ourselves as most of us anyway, as a homogeneous WASP or whatever country. But it's a problem for a lot of richer countries. I actually, in the book, I cite the free movement of labor in the pre-colonial times. There weren't any national boundaries or quotas or visas or anything. People sort of washed around. Indians became experienced handlers of ports and cargoes and would hire themselves out to non-Indian shipping families and so on. There was just a lot of movement, and then the monsoon would keep people in other countries for quite a while. So of course, if you fast forward that and say, you ought to have free migration today, I mean, that's a total non-starter, and they would all go to certain places and not others. Singapore is a net immigration country, labor-wise, and Indonesia is an exporter of labor. What I end up saying is that there ought to be a regional set of standards on handling of migrants. I mean, there's a terrible amount of exploitation that goes on of migrants who are sold a bill of goods by some agent that comes to their village, and they end up, the women end up in a brothel, I mean, whatever. The Filipinos now have tried very strategically to register all their workers. Singapore has seasonal quotas for them and factors that into their national plan. But for the most part, there's no real policy or standards. Malaysia kicked out a lot of migrant workers. I think it's a real problem. All I can think of is that ultimately, if there's enough prosperity in the region, people won't want to migrate as much as they do. But I'm glad you raised it, because it's not going to help Australia's foreign policy in Asia if it's perceived to be racist or anti-immigrant. Yeah. I think I see Mark at the door. Oh, yeah, one more. Yeah, one more, and this will be the end.